because that's what the boomers needed for retirement. They needed the pension funds to really be sufficiently funded. Okay, so there's a whole group of people interested in making this all possible. And so while the money would flow out and manufacturing and jobs would flow to Asia, there would be something new lifting up. Okay, so all of this was known. I don't know if you remember Newt Gingrich running around and saying every kid needed a laptop. Well, that's what he was talking about. He was talking about integrating new technology and helping revive new skills. Okay, so we knew all this was going to happen, and we knew that we needed a plan to deal with it. Okay, so I was part of a group of people saying, pay down your debt, flow equity, small business, create new skills, new jobs, because otherwise the American middle class is toast. Well, you know, sort of the litigation that we dealt with was the response. The federal government said, no, we want you guys to leave town, and we're going to force you out with dirty tricks. And instead what we're going to do is we're going to have a bubble. We're going to have a housing bubble and get everybody, instead of building new skills, to run around and just build bigger houses. So we're going to build much bigger houses, and while everybody's building bigger houses and watching TV, we're going to quietly move all the money out of the country, and then when it's all said and done, you know, it'll be too late, because they'll have, instead of less debt, more debt. They'll have fewer small businesses, because we're going to have our big franchises and corporations come in and take over the local market. And, you know, so we'll have a party and no one will notice. And then by the time they notice, it'll be too late. And so what happened was the average American family was encouraged to take on mortgage debt, auto debt, credit card debt, that in many respects they did not know that they couldn't afford. Now, what was amazing was the government and the financial institutions knew they couldn't afford it. In other words, they encouraged them to take on this debt, knowing that the policies were being engineered that would cause their incomes to fall later on. So, for example, let's just say you're a man with a family and 2 kids, and you have a job as a software developer, and you feel like you're doing very well. You don't know that a whole series of things are going on behind the scenes that mean you're going to lose your job in 3 to 5 years. I mean, it's statistically very probable, okay? So you don't know that, but the financial institution that's making you the loan does know that, okay? So they come to you and you say, well, you know, the housing prices in Austin, Texas are rising, and I'm doing well, and my family's growing, and I need a bigger, it's a perfectly reasonable thing. And that's a strategy that's always worked for Americans with very rare exception. So that's the responsible thing for you to do. And I say, oh yeah, no, I'm encouraging you to do that, and in fact, you don't need to make a down payment, and I'll encourage you to, so I encourage you to do the mortgage, and you take out the mortgage, you buy the house. Now, under the law, I'm not an attorney, but my understanding of the law is, if I know something about your financial situation that you don't, and I don't disclose that, that's a material omission. So if I don't say to you, Mr. Smith, you keep your savings in this bank, and we're using your savings to loan money to J.P. Morgan Chase to move all these jobs abroad. In fact, all the jobs for your food stamp government contract, we're moving to India. So you as a taxpayer are going to fund these jobs. Your deposits are moving these jobs. And when we get these jobs all moved in another 3 to 5 years, you'll probably lose your job. Okay? We don't tell you any of that. We just say, here's more debt. Now, under the law, I believe that there's a case to be made that that's fraudulent inducement. Fraudulent inducement is if I encourage you to take on debt and fail to disclose something that I know that you don't. That's a material omission under the law. It's illegal. Okay? Now, if that's the case, just speaking as the former Assistant Secretary of Housing, the vast majority of mortgages originated in the United States after 1996 were fraudulently induced. Now, we can all say that. Even, let's say the Supreme Court decides tomorrow they're all fraudulently induced. The reality is our pension funds own them. So we just sold our fraudulently induced mortgages into the pension funds, And if we can't pay off those mortgages, then guess what happens to our retirement savings? In the summer of 2000, I was giving a speech to a group of people called Spiritual Frontiers Foundation International. And they have a conference once a year to discuss how they as a group can help our society evolve spiritually. They're very well educated, very wonderful, very committed people. So I'm in the middle of the speech, and a friend of mine had asked me to give a speech on, it's called How the Money Works on Organized Crime. And it later became an article called Narco Dollars for Dummies. And so I'm in the middle of the speech, and I'm describing the fact that the Department of Justice a year before had told a reporter that I work with that the U.S. economy launders $500 billion to $1 trillion of all dirty money. So that's narcotics trafficking, that's tax evasion, that's financial fraud. With financial fraud, it's much bigger now. So I said to this wonderful audience of spiritually evolved people, what would happen if we stopped? And there's a little sort of conversation, and they said, well, you know, our mutual funds would go down because that $500 billion to $1 trillion wouldn't come into the stock market, you know, go to London or Zurich or Hong Kong. And we'd have trouble financing the government deficit because we need to borrow all this money to finance. So our taxes might go up or our government checks might stop. And I said, okay, well, let's pretend there's a big red button up here on the lectern. And if you push that button, you can stop all hard narcotics trafficking in your city, your county, your state, your country tomorrow, thus offending the people who control $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of money laundering through the U.S. financial system and the accumulated reinvested capital thereon over the last umpteen years. Who here will push the button? And out of 100 people dedicated to evolving our society spiritually, guess how many would push the button? One. So I said to the other 99, why would you not push the button? And they said, we don't want our government checks to stop, we don't want our taxes to go up, and we don't want our mutual funds to go down. So that's the conundrum. Because if you look at the American financial system, we have created through force, you know, it's called the central banking warfare model. The central bank prints paper, and then the military makes sure that everybody takes it while they're extracting the natural resources for cheap, right? Okay, so the tapeworm economy is not just in America. The tapeworm is extracting a subsidy all around the world. And until 2008, most Americans were the beneficiary of that. Now, you can say most Americans were naive. If you look at every county in America, one of the biggest businesses in every county is narcotics trafficking. Illegal drugs targeted at the children that makes everyone money. Okay? And then the government has huge war on drugs, and that makes a lot of other people money. So one of the biggest industries in America is the genocide of the children of our neighbors. That puts us as a people across the line because we've been complicit. I spent a decade trying to warn my family, my friends. You know, I ended up on Alex Jones and all sorts of radio shows explaining. I was the former Assistant Secretary of Housing. I was a former partner of a Wall Street firm. And yet, the majority of people who heard me wouldn't believe me and wouldn't listen. So we've all gone along, we've all been complicit, we've all, one way or another, been the beneficiary. And, you know, and it's hard, it's hard to face what has to be faced. I used to have a pastor in Washington who would say, if we can face it, God can fix it. And what came out that day that I told the story about the red, you know, the story of the group I was speaking to was what they didn't understand is if they would just look at it, if they would just look at the red button problem and talk about it, that there was a way to turn the red button green. In other words, the question we need to ask is not should we push the red button, but how do we make money pushing it? So I call it turning it green. Because there are. The tapeworm economy is draining us. And so the issue is how do we reverse that drain? How do we start to get energy for us instead of giving energy to the tapeworm? And so part of it is delinking it from this global taxation system that's going on that we all think we've been the beneficiaries of. Because the day of the insider sharing the subsidy with us is diminishing. We've been gutting our whole economy for decades. I mean, we've been moving manufacturing capacity abroad, significantly since since the 80s. So this has been going on for 25 years, and it's continuing. And, there's a myth that we're moving it abroad because it's more efficient, and that's not always true. A lot of times we're moving it abroad because we can change who owns it and who controls it by moving it. So, it's churning and it's pumping and dumping in a way that doesn't make the economy wealthier. But there's no doubt that the whole GATT process is one that is to me terrifying. And I'll tell you where the greatest danger lies. The greatest danger lies not in the wiping out of the American middle class or the re-engineering of jobs and how they work, or even the transference of power from sovereign governments to corporations. The most dangerous part of GATT is the creation of a corporate right to create patents on life. So to create terminator seed and control the seed and food supply. What GATT is doing, particularly if this new round, the Doha round, goes into implementation, is basically shifting 2 to 3 billion people off the land as small farmers and either killing them or into the cities in a process that will ultimately control the seed and food supply, as that seed and food supply is being genetically manipulated. And when you take 50% of a planetary population and move it from something where it's eating healthy food on a self-sufficient basis into a dependent role where it's dependent on corporations for food that is not healthy, then you're talking about a kind of planetary slavery which is more horrible than anything we've ever envisioned. Now, one of my questions is control, to build a global financial system around a dollar in which the dollar is hugely subsidized by this sort of global taxation system. I mean, to give you an example, you're the Chinese, I'm the Americans, I sell you dollars way above market level, and you take them and hold them while they go down 5% every year. That's a taxation system through the balance sheet, okay? So one of the ways I do this is not only by having a military, but by controlling oil, okay? So controlling a very important physical asset is almost essential to having currency control. And one of my questions is control of the food supply part of implementing a global digital currency? There's nothing more important to building either a healthy civilization or a healthy economy than transparency. Okay? So one of my favorite economics book is a book called The Evolution of Cooperation by a brilliant economist, Robert Axelrod. And in it, he describes the conditions. What are the conditions that would bring about an economy where people make money by building, peace and cooperation instead of war and destruction? And what he finds out is the most important condition precedent is transparency. And transparency means that if I want to consider engaging in a transaction with you, I know if you're a good guy or a bad guy. Do you wear a white hat or a black hat? Yeah. If you can go to the other side of the planet and rape and kill and maim and then come back and be socially prestigious here and me not know, then crime pays. In that economy, if you can do dirty in secret and still be socially acceptable, then crime will always pay in that kind of economy. So the condition precedent to a healthy economy is, how can we make it expensive to be a criminal? Okay? Because if I know you're wearing a black hat, then it's like, ooh, I don't want to do business with you. Okay? So what we have in this economy is one in which literally people are doing all sorts of nefarious things, and then they're held up as being admirable and respectful.